Kindness costs nothing, but sometimes it pays in ways you never expect. The cold wind cut through the crowded city street as Sarah pulled her worn-out coat tighter around her. It had been another long, exhausting day, juggling 2 part-time jobs, barely making rent, and trying not to think about the stack of unpaid bills waiting for her at home. She had been moving fast, head down, when she saw him. An elderly man, struggling to push his grocery cart across the icy sidewalk. His hands trembled from the cold, his frail frame barely able to keep the cart steady. People walked past him without a second glance, too busy with their own lives to notice. Sarah hesitated. She was late for her shift. Her boss had already warned her that another tardy would mean losing the job. But something inside her refused to look away. She stepped forward. "Sir, do you need help?" The old man looked up, startled, as if he wasn't used to people stopping for him. His wrinkled face softened. "That would be very kind of you." Sarah smiled and took hold of the cart, guiding it carefully as they walked. "Where are you headed?" "Just a few blocks down," he said, "but my legs aren't what they used to be." She slowed her pace to match his, listening as he spoke about his late wife, the bakery they used to run, and how the world had changed around him. By the time they reached his apartment, he looked at her with something unreadable in his eyes. "You didn't have to do this," he said. Sarah shrugged. It was the right thing to do. The old man smiled, but there was something knowing in his expression. "Not many people stop for strangers anymore." Sarah just nodded, offering a small smile. "Well, I should get going." She turned to leave, already preparing herself for the lecture her boss was about to give her. But then, the man said something that made her freeze. "What if I told you this wasn't just a grocery run?" His voice was quieter now, measured. "What if I told you this was a test?" Sarah frowned, confused. A test for what? The old man chuckled, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crisp envelope. "For someone who deserves a second chance." Sarah's hands trembled as she took it, her heart pounding, and when she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Inside was a check for $1 million. Sarah's vision blurred as she stared at the check. Her hands shook, her breath catching in her throat. This can't be real," she whispered, looking up at the old man. "Why would you give this to me?" The man chuckled softly, tucking his hands into his coat pockets. "Because kindness is rare these days, and when I find it, I make sure it doesn't go unrewarded." Sarah's heart pounded. "But I don't know you. You don't even know if I deserve this." His gaze softened. "I know enough." He gestured toward the busy sidewalk. "Do you know how many people walked past me today? Dozens, maybe even 100. All of them saw an old man struggling, and not one of them stopped. Except for you." Sarah swallowed hard. "I wasn't expecting anything in return." "That's exactly why you're the right person," he said, his voice warm. She shook her head, still unable to process it. "But who are you?" The old man smiled. "The name's Henry Whitmore." He extended a hand. "Retired businessman. And, well, millionaire apparently." Sarah's eyes widened. Henry Whitmore. The name clicked instantly. One of the wealthiest real estate investors in the country. She had read about him in the news once, about how he had vanished from the business world years ago. And now, here he was, offering her a second chance at life. Tears burned at the edges of her eyes. "I don't know what to say." Henry patted her shoulder. Then, "Don't say anything yet." He gestured to the check. "Take it, do something good with it, get yourself back on your feet. And, when you're ready," his lips twitched into a smile, "pay it forward." Sarah clutched the check to her chest, emotions crashing over her all at once. Just this morning, she had been wondering how much longer she could keep going. And now she had a future. A real one. Some moments change your day, others change your entire life. The real question is, what do you do with the second chance you never saw coming? Sarah stood frozen, the weight of the check pressing against her chest. But it wasn't just the money. It was everything it represented. A way out, a fresh start, a chance to breathe without the constant fear of drowning in bills and exhaustion. She looked up at Henry, her voice shaking. "I don't even know how to thank you." Henry smiled. "You already did, by proving there's still kindness in the world." Sarah wiped her eyes quickly, glancing at the check again. The number still didn't seem real. "But what if I mess this up?" Henry chuckled. "Then you'll learn from it, but something tells me you won't." He tilted his head. "What's the first thing you're going to do?" Sarah let out a shaky breath, overwhelmed by the possibilities. "I think," she swallowed, her voice steadying, "I think I'm going to quit my second job." Henry grinned. "Good start." She laughed softly, still in disbelief. "And then? I don't know. Maybe go back to school. Maybe finally open that little bakery I always dreamed about." She hesitated. "It's silly, isn't it?" Henry's eyes twinkled. "Not at all. My wife and I started with a tiny bakery before we built everything else." His voice softened. "It wasn't the business that mattered. It was the passion behind it." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "I always wanted to bake, but dreams don't pay the rent." Henry smiled knowingly. "Now they can." She stared at him, the man who had walked into her life by pure chance, or maybe fate, and given her an opportunity she never could have imagined. Sarah straightened her shoulders. "I won't waste this." Henry nodded. "I know you won't." She hesitated for a moment, then did something she hadn't done in years. She hugged someone, without fear, without hesitation. "Thank you," she whispered. Henry patted her back. "Just promise me one thing." Sarah pulled away, wiping her eyes. "Anything." He smiled. "One day, when you're in the position to help someone, do it." Sarah exhaled, nodding. "I will." As she walked away, the check still clutched in her hands, she realized something. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was finally living. Kindness is like a seed. You never know how big it will grow. The question is, when the time comes, will you plant it for someone else? Months passed, and Sarah's life transformed in ways she never imagined. She quit her exhausting second job, enrolled in business courses, and, just like she had once dreamed, opened her own small bakery on the corner of Maple Street. Every morning, the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls drifted through the air, drawing in customers who quickly became regulars. But there was one customer who never missed a morning. Henry Whitmore. He would sit by the window, sipping coffee, watching Sarah work, with the same quiet pride as a mentor watching their student succeed. One day, as she placed a warm blueberry muffin in front of him, on the house as always, he smiled. "So, was it worth it?" Sarah chuckled, wiping flour off her hands. "Every second." He nodded approvingly. "And tell me, do you remember our deal?" She smirked. "Pay it forward?" Henry's eyes twinkled. "That's right." Sarah leaned against the counter. "Actually, I already did." Henry raised an eyebrow. She smiled. "There's a young girl, Ella, comes in every day after school, watches me bake through the window, but never has enough money to buy anything." Henry listened closely. "So, last week, I invited her in, gave her an apron, let her help me knead the dough." She shrugged. "She reminds me of myself. She told me she wants to be a baker someday." Henry grinned. "And what did you do?" Sarah's smile softened. "I told her she already is one." Henry exhaled deeply, nodding. "That's how it starts." Sarah tilted her head. "How what starts?" He set down his coffee, looking at her with quiet wisdom. "A legacy." She felt a lump form in her throat. Henry reached into his coat pocket and slid an envelope across the counter. Sarah frowned. "What's this?" "Open it." Her fingers trembled as she pulled out a single sheet of paper. As her eyes scanned the words, she gasped. It was a property deed. To the bakery. Her bakery. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Henry, I don't understand." Henry smiled warmly. "You paid it forward. Now it's my turn." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She had gone from struggling to survive to owning her own business, debt-free, and all because of one small act of kindness on a cold winter's day. She shook her head in disbelief. "Why me?" Henry's voice was steady. because one day, someone's going to need you the way you once needed me. Sarah let out a shaky breath, gripping the deed like it was a piece of her soul. I won't waste this, she whispered. Henry patted her hand. I know you won't. And as he walked out of the bakery, Sarah wiped her tears, already knowing what she would do next. The next time someone needed a second chance, she wouldn't hesitate. Because kindness didn't just change lives. It created them. A single act of kindness can set off a chain reaction. The question is, will you be the one to start it?